I believe this is the first time we've gotten an opportunity to see the four women that I'm about to introduce all together at once in one space. Unfortunately, we don't get to be together shoulder to shoulder, but we are here together, and I'm so excited to introduce these women, these trailblazers. So I'm gonna just dive right in. I'm gonna start with U.S. Senator Kamala Harris. She was elected in 2016. Senator Harris currently represents California as one of its two senators and is the second ever Black woman to be elected to the U.S. Senate. Senator Harris was also the first Black woman to serve as the Attorney General of California, where she won a historic mortgage settlement during the housing crisis, as well as led a groundbreaking study on the impact of transnational criminal organization and human trafficking in California. Thank you, Senator, for being here. We also have Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx. Kim was elected to become Cook County State's Attorney in November of 2016, making her the first ever Black woman to hold that title. Under her tenure, Cook County leads the nation in exonerating wrongful convictions and has expunged over 1,000 low-level marijuana offenses to help correct the failed war on drugs, while also reducing violent crimes in Chicago over the past 2 years. I want to personally thank you for that, knowing someone who this has changed their life in such a huge way. Thank you for that. We also have Baltimore State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby. State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby was elected in 2014 in November, making her the youngest chief prosecutor of major city. Under Mosby's leadership, the Baltimore State's Attorney Office has nearly doubled the size of victims, witnesses, and services. Oh, wow. State Attorney Mosby created the Policy and Legislative Affairs Division that has made significant legislative strides. Thank you very much, State Attorney Mosby, and also have St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner. Circuit Attorney Gardner was first elected in 2016, becoming the first Black woman to hold the title of St. Louis Circuit Attorney. She has reduced and removed or reduced amounts of cash bond for minor nonviolent offenses, and she is also focused on expanding diversion and drug court programs. As you guys can see, I mean, we have a panel of first trailblazers, and as these ladies made sure I knew before we all streamed in, was that they are just only the first of what will soon to be many. So we're going to dive right in, and I'm going to ask a question for all of you to answer, but I will start with Senator Harris, and I just want to ask you, what does the statement "justice is on the ballot" mean to you, and what motivates you to do the work?
Well, just to thank you, first of all, I'm so honored to be with all of the phenomenal women who are a part of this evening. I just want to thank Collective PAC for always your brilliance in hosting smart conversations and engaging everyone to be a part of it, knowing we have so much at stake. So Stefanie, thank you for bringing us together. So Regina, justice is on the ballot in 2020. This election is going to be probably one of the biggest and most dispositive and important elections of our lifetime. We have so much at stake. And when I think about justice on the ballot, it's about criminal justice is on the ballot. When we look at the fact that we need police reform desperately in this country, when we are honoring the lives and mourning the loss of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and I could go on down the list. Economic justice is on the ballot. When you look at the fact that Black families have 1/10 the wealth of white families, and then you look at the impact on small Black-owned businesses during the coronavirus, where as many as maybe 90% of Black and minority-owned businesses did not get the benefit of the PPP. Environmental justice is on the ballot. I was just doing an event talking about the need that we have for our communities to have clean and safe drinking water, places like Flint, up and down the southern part of our country, in urban areas, in rural areas. What else is on the ballot? Healthcare justice is on the ballot. Again, when we know that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in connection with childbirth than other women, when we know that Black families are 20% more likely to have asthma than other families, and I could go on and on. These are all issues about justice. These are all issues about equity. These are all issues about whether America has actually been true to its stated principle, which is that all should be treated as equal, and to the prosecutors and the lawyers, and equal justice under law. So all of this is on the ballot, and I am so thankful that we are convening to really highlight the need that we have to be active and to vote in this upcoming election.
Thank you. Kim Gardner, I'm gonna kick that to you because I want each of you to have a couple minutes to just talk about what motivates you to do the work and what justice on the ballot means to you. So I'm gonna pass the mic to you.
Thank you, Ms. King. I'm starstruck right now, so thank you. But what justice means to me is it means to people who look like me to have the opportunity to feel and see a criminal justice system that's fair and just for all. What justice means to me is that people like myself have been looking for justice in the criminal justice system since we arrived on the continent. What it means to me is that use our vote to elect a prosecutor like Kim Foxx, who is going to be transparent and accountable, to elect a state's attorney like Marilyn Mosby, who will hold police accountable, and to the now Senator Ms. Kamala Harris to be the Attorney General, and to elect an individual like myself, the Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner, a former single mother who wants to hold people accountable, but at the same time look at how we can have alternatives to mass incarceration. And what motivates me is to address the broken systems that fuel the criminal justice system, the healthcare system, the economic system, the healthcare system, the mental health system. And when a judge asks anyone to plead guilty to any period of time, they ask about these broken systems. And one of the things that's most disturbing in my 15 years as a former assistant circuit attorney, the judge will ask, what's the highest grade level many individuals complete? And people of color who are represented more in the criminal justice system will often have dropped out before the 6th grade. And so justice, what motivates me is to address those broken systems and to address the criminal justice system to make it fair and just for everyone and hold everyone accountable, but at the same time to address the root causes of what perpetuates mass incarceration and perpetuates the unfairness of the criminal justice system. That's what motivates me to do my job.
I love it. Just talking to you ladies just makes me have hope. I'm gonna pass the mic to Kim Foxx to hear from you and about what justice on the ballot means to you, Ms. Foxx.
Thank you, Regina. And it is, I repeat everyone's remarks, it is amazing to be here with you all tonight, and to thank Stefanie for convening this. And I too am starstruck by the women on this panel. I think for me, it's what Kim just said. I am the child of a teenage single mom from the projects who, when you look at our criminal justice system, I have more in common with the people who have been either victims of crime or who have been defendants than I do with many of the lawyers who work with me. And the reality is, here in Chicago, 86% of the people who are in our Cook County jail are Black and Latino. Most of them have the same life experiences that I had. And often when I would talk to people and they would say, oh, you come from Cabrini, oh, your mother was a teenage mom, I was homeless when I was 16, I'm a sexual assault survivor, people would say to me, my God, how did you make it? And that is based on the supposition that people like me are supposed to fail. And there's been this acceptance in our country and in our governments that there are people who are not going to get the resources and access to opportunities to be able to live healthy, safe, thriving lives. And the place where we end up seeing all of those failed systems are in our criminal justice system. So the fact that I have 86% of the people in our jails here are Black and brown, and yet you look at the field of prosecution, of the 2,400 elected prosecutors across the country, about 1% are women of color, 1%. And that, if you break that down to Black women, there are very few of us. And so when we have a chance to be on panels like this, it is exciting because the numbers are so small and we could talk about that work. It's on the ballot because these conversations that we're having as a nation right now, as we reckon with the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, around what are the systems that we hold, we also like look to the big structures and the dysfunction that is in Washington, and we're so grateful to have Senator Harris there. But locally, it's the DA or the state's attorney who gets to bring charges in a case to hold police accountable. As people are looking for justice for Breonna Taylor, what is the prosecutor in that case doing? When we talk about a failed war on drugs, one of the reasons that I fought for marijuana legalization in Illinois that had a component to it that would automatically vacate the convictions of people with marijuana convictions is because I know that the war on drugs disproportionately impacted our communities, and people can't get jobs, housing, and education because of that conviction. That was a local prosecutor working with local elected officials. And so for people who feel like these issues are far away or daunting, or it's just one layer of government, it is the local elections that have immediate and significant impact. And so I'm motivated every day by the people who have not been given the same opportunities as I have because of the zip code that they were born into, who has just as much talent, if not more, who have been locked out of our systems because of a racist criminal justice system that has disproportionately impacted our communities and has not had the voices of the people who have been impacted, not just sitting at the table, but setting the menu for reform. And that's my goal in this role.
Not just sitting at the table, but setting the menu. Write that down. That should be inspirational quote that we all wake up to every morning. I'm gonna kick it off to you, Miss Mosby. You are up next on the mic.
So first,
and it looks
I guess
like your mic could be, or your camera may be off.
Is my camera off? Shouldn't be off.
All right. So we're gonna continue, and hopefully we'll get the technical difficulties worked out there with Marilyn. But let's just keep moving forward, and we'll hear from.
I'm here.
There you go. There you go. Ooh.
There I am.
Come on, sis.
All right. So first and foremost, I have to echo everything that everybody has already said. I am fangirling over here because, you look at Kamala Harris, who is a pioneer in the reform movement for prosecutors all across this country. Kim Foxx, Kim Gardner, Stefanie, I just admire all of the work that you all do each and every day. And you're an example for so many others. So that's first. And Regina, that goes without saying how much everybody admires you. But I do think that before we talk about what justice is, we have to talk about what justice isn't. And what we know is that justice isn't allegedly passing a $20 bill during a global pandemic in order to get food. We know that justice isn't failing to put on your turn signal and ending up dead. We know that justice isn't making eye contact with police in a high crime neighborhood and deciding to run and ending up dead, being in a drive-through, sleeping in your house, eating ice cream and ending up dead. And so I'm encouraged right now in this moment, because I feel like the veil of ignorance, I'm a Tuskegee alumni, excuse my play of words, but the veil of ignorance for most Americans with regard to race relations in this country and police brutality, the veil of ignorance has been lifted. And I'm encouraged by the leaders that we're seeing out here in the protests and demanding change. But the real change is not necessarily at the protest, but in the policy. And so when it comes down to justice being on the ballot, as Kim stated, it is so incredibly important for us to understand how important this election is. If it wasn't for COVID, if it wasn't for race relations, police accountability, economic justice, all of the issues that have been eloquently already illustrated, it is time for us to actually understand the importance of one of the biggest civil rights issues facing Black people in this country, which is the criminal justice system and its disproportionate impact that it has on us. And so when we look at like local prosecutors, and I'm on here with my colleagues, all of whom have been prosecutors or played prosecutors, prosecutors are the ones who decide who's going to be charged, what they're going to be charged with, what sentence recommendations they're going to make. Prosecutors are the ones who decide if an individual is going to get in the criminal justice system or out of the criminal justice system. The best way to reform the criminal justice system is from within, and as already was stated by Kim Foxx, 95% of the individuals making decisions about our day-to-day lives, about who's in the system, how they're in the system, they're white. 79% are white men. As women of color, we represent 1% of all elected prosecutors. So when it comes to understanding the importance of mass incarceration and the disproportionate impact that the criminal justice system has had, and not only on Black people, but the enforcement of these laws on Black people, whether or not you're going to prosecute these low-level offenses that ultimately provide for an engagement between police and communities, and a negative sort of engagement. That all comes down to the discretion of prosecutors. And so it is incredibly important for people to understand that they have got to get out. We saw what injustice looks like, but justice looks like you're holding that prosecutor to their job, and their mission is to pursue justice over convictions and to apply one standard of justice to all, regardless of race, sex, religion, and occupation. We know what injustice is not, thanks to my colleague Mike Freeman in Minneapolis, but we know what justice looks like thanks to Paul Howard in Atlanta. Again, this is incredibly important, and it's all on the ballot this time around in November. So I thank you, Stefanie, for giving us the opportunity to talk about the importance of it.
Thank you so much, Marilyn, and to hear the passion in which you speak of, and in which you speak with. I know that you and all the other women do this work from your hearts, and I keep hearing the word power come up in my mind. And when Quentin and I started the collective 4 years ago in 2016, it really was focused on creating this organization that could build Black political power in every facet of our electoral process to create equitable representation for Black people on the local, state, and federal level. And so much of that is not just in our elected positions of who creates policies, but also who enforces the laws. We've been saying in this election cycle, actually, that, we know that to get the laws that we need to advance our communities forward, we have to change the lawmakers. Well, we also have to make sure that we're focusing on having the right people in place to enforce those laws, and to have our country operate within a system that is just and fair. And so I want to ask Senator Harris and Kim Foxx, I want to get your thoughts on this whole concept of power and building Black political power, and how we can build that power within the system. What does it look like when we build that power? And especially, Senator, now that you have the unique position to have been a prosecutor and to now be a U.S. Senator at the highest levels of being able to create policy changes, how are you all seeing and operating within your power to create substantial changes that will benefit specifically the Black community?
So I'll start by saying that when we talk about building Black power, we in the same sentence and breadth and level of commitment need to talk about maintaining Black power. And I'll tell you why I say that. I'm going to just be focused on this panel. Kim Foxx, Marilyn Mosby, what Kimberly Gardner is going through right now, what Paul Howard is going through right now, what I went through when I was an elected prosecutor. there will be a lot of folks who support us to get elected, and then we make decisions that are about challenging the status quo and changing the system. And we piss off a lot of people who are invested in the status quo. And then it comes time for election, and they put a lot of resources in trying to get rid of us. And you can talk to every woman on this panel, including folks like Paul Howard right now, and you will know about police unions who have gone after them. The police union marched on my office. And so when we talk about building Black power, it's about investing in folks who want to run and encouraging them to run and then supporting them when they run. Because I'm talking now about elected power. It's about fundraising, because we don't generally have the kind of relationships where people are used to just writing checks.
Right.
And we need to cultivate that, and we need to let the members of our sororities and fraternities and our church community and so on, and our families and our neighbors get used to all that is required to actually build that power, because we can pray for the power, but we also have to actually invest in building that power. And then, like I said, maintaining it. Because when we're talking about Black prosecutors, what ends up happening, progressive Black prosecutors, because not all Black prosecutors are progressive.
That's true.
What ends up happening is that then they get in, and the Kim Foxxes and the Marilyn Mosbys and the Kimberly Gardners make the kinds of decisions that we want them to make. And then we can't leave them out there when they're fighting by themselves to retain their power because they have challenged the system. So I just want to add that to this conversation. We need to mentor, we need to support, we need to encourage folks. We need to also reward and applaud ambition, right? Let's never let anybody get us to that place where we start criticizing somebody for having ambition, right? Because it requires ambition to actually push power. Don't take that. Let's not call somebody getting uppity, right? That's what we want them to do, is to look for that thing and know they can achieve it. My mother had many sayings. One, she would say, you may be the first to do many things, make sure you're not the last. But the other thing she would tell me is, don't you ever let anybody tell you who you are. You tell them who you are. And we want to encourage that in all those people who seek power, and then we want to help them retain that power. And I'll pass the mic to Ms. Foxx.
Yeah, I mean, the senator said it all. I mean, and I want to be clear. When I ran for office, Senator and I were running at the same time. She was running for the Senate when I was running for my first term as state's attorney, and we met at an ambulance event, I believe. And she quickly said, "What do you need?" I went out to California, and she gave me hours of her time in the middle of a Senate run, because she knew how important it was to not just be the first or the only, to pull me along, and has been pulling me along for the last 4 years, and I'm honored for that. But the power that we hold, as Marilyn just articulated, the power in these prosecutor jobs is so immense. And that's why I think the what you see in terms of the pushback is so intense. The intensity of the pushback that Marilyn received after Freddie Gray almost 5 years ago, the intensity of the pushback that I've seen. You know, I too, Senator, had the police union march on my office with 4 white nationalist groups in tow. And trying to have me removed. It is, and one of the police union people said it, we don't like the fact that she is for bail reform. We don't like the fact that she is vacating wrongful convictions. We don't like the fact that she's not prosecuting marijuana offenses. The system has been built for so long, taking for granted that we don't know what the power is that we hold. And as we continue to exercise that power, to flex that muscle, and then to bring others on and to build a network, it is incredibly intimidating. But it isn't work that can be done alone. It isn't work that is just dependent on the women that you see here. It requires community. Hold us accountable. Hold us accountable. There are going to be things that we do that you don't agree with that we should have to answer for. But at the same time, lift us up, move us along, think long game. The more people that we have in positions of power who are unapologetic and unequivocal in their commitment to our communities, And I think that's what this allows, is to be able to say, listen, in this moment and beyond, our communities have been suffering because of these policies. And as a Black woman, I'm not going to leave that part of me in the locker room, right? You see me, I'm Black. My agenda is going to impact the Black community unapologetically. And so when we do that, we need the community to come with and say, this is what we expect, and this is what we will protect, while still holding accountable. And the conversation that the senator just said about ambition, we have to reject the poison pills that people try to put into our conversations about how people get where they are. We have to work, and we know this 3 times as hard. You don't just get to be the second Black woman senator by like chilling on a couch somewhere. It requires you to work extraordinarily hard. It requires you to have above and beyond. And so when we get there, support that and bring along. But don't reject the power. Don't reject that power is something that it does not cede it easily. And when we get it, we have to be able to share it with those who share the agenda.
That's both awesome points. And I know Regina has a question, but I just want to make sure, because I don't think that I adequately did this at the top of the conversation. I think it's very important to extend our appreciation, because so many of the points of what you all brought up and what you face through this process to get to where you are, to represent the people, is significant. So I just want to just say that to both of you and to Marilyn and Kim, but I'll turn over to Regina now for her next question.
Stefanie, so all of you women actually kind of touched on this, and I feel like this is kind of a question that the Black community has, knowing that various aspects of how the criminal justice system was created and the impact that it's had on the Black community was rooted that were from slavery and post Reconstruction, and as a result of that, you have the court of public opinion, and you have the actual court system, and with that, and taking all of that into consideration, do you think that it's actually possible to transform the criminal justice system into one that actually treats everyone justly? Because I think most Black people feel like it's impossible, and I just want to hear from, we'll hear from Marilyn and Kim, first on that. Do you think that it's possible?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay, now you can hear me. It's absolutely possible. You can call me a dreamer. I just believe that it's possible. And the reason why is that when you look historically at the criminal justice system, as you've already indicated, from the time that we were brought here as slaves and the enforcement of these slave codes, to the abolishment of the 13th Amendment, where they carved out an exception to the dehumanization of Black people, which is for criminals, from that time through Jim Crow, through the civil rights era, through the war on drugs, which we now know was a war on Black people. And when we look at that history, right, like, you can be encouraged now in that people have been awakened, but by the same token, what are we doing to change the system that we know has disproportionately impacted Black people? Well, when you have 1% of prosecutors making decisions about day-to-day lives of Black people in this country, we have got to be at that table making those decisions. For me, being one of the first prosecutors in this country, Stefanie Morales was another one to attempt to hold police officers accountable for the death of a Black man. That accountability absolutely led to exposure. A week after I charged those officers, and let me just say, Freddie Gray made eye contact with police in a high crime neighborhood, was unconstitutionally arrested, placed in a metal wagon head first, feet shackled and handcuffed. His pleas for medical after his spine was partially severed. His pleas for medical attention were ignored. I followed the facts with the law, and I wouldn't do anything differently. But understand and recognize that that accountability, which wasn't being had in this country, led to exposure. A week after I charged those officers, the Department of Justice came in, exposed a pattern and practice of discriminatory enforcement, and a 163-page scathing report. That exposure ultimately led to reform. We now have a federally enforceable consent decree that, even despite the Trump administration that tried to stop it, is still on record. And because of that reform, we have a spotlight on the entrenched police corruption of one of the largest police departments in the country, right? So you look at that, and you, is it possible to reform a criminal justice system? The only way to reform the criminal justice system is from within. And we learned that from our ancestors. You have to be to implode it and to address the concerns that we have on a day-to-day basis, to be able to make a decision about a conviction integrity unit and exonerating those that are wrongly convicted, accused, and incarcerated for years. The prosecutor is making the decision to get out here and say, I'm not prosecuting marijuana conviction or possession cases because you have been discriminately enforcing these laws upon poor Black and brown communities. That falls on the discretion of the prosecutor. When it comes to ensuring that we get to young people before they get to the criminal justice system, implementing programs such as crime control and prevention divisions out of the state's attorneys, these are all decisions that come from the prosecutor. So it is absolutely appropriate, and it can absolutely change. And I just want to say that I stand on the shoulders of those individuals who were pioneers. Senator Kamala Harris was a pioneer in this reform movement. I would not be here if it was not for her. And Kim, I just can't tell you enough how important it is to be able to reform the system, and it has to come from within.
Kim?
Just want to echo the sentiments of Marilyn, who I stand on the shoulders of Marilyn Mosby and Stefanie Morales, and of course, the wonderful Senator Kamala Harris, as well as Kim Foxx. But what they're saying, we have to understand that the system is doing what it was meant to do. It needs to be dismantled and rebuilt so we can address the inequities of a criminal justice system where Black and brown people are represented more than any other group. We have to understand the systemic racism and root it out by saying it's zero tolerance in the criminal justice system when you have the ability to take someone's life and liberty. And you have to have prosecutors like us on this panel that want to hold police accountable like everyone else, because many people think we're talking about just police. It's not just police. It's the prosecutor who's overzealous and overcharged individuals in the community. It's actually the courts who may sentence people to longer periods of time. So we have to look at, police who, the people in the communities that need police the most. Everyone has a story of mistrust of the whole criminal justice system, and we have to address it because we have, police who need to serve and protect, and we have prosecutors who need to be the ministers of justice in the criminal justice system. We also need to have a judge who's fair and impartial as a trier of fact. So we have to look at the systemic racism. We have to look at, as some police officers, as well as police unions, as well as police chiefs, believe that somehow the police department is immune from these systemic racism that perpetuates a lot of the mistrust in the criminal justice system. But you have to have prosecutors like us who want to fight against the status quo, because the status quo will have you believe that doing the right thing and truly being ministers of justice, they will come after you with full force and a vengeance. They will ruin your credibility. They would challenge your competence. They would dehumanize you in many different ways. And we have to also talk about the dehumanization of individuals in the criminal justice system. It's these everyday slights of injustice that we never really talk about. They do not receive the actual media attention that cause, or the root causes of the mistrust of the whole criminal justice system, not just with police. And that's why it's so important that we have to dismantle and we have to rebuild a fair, just criminal justice system for everyone inside the system.
What you and Marilyn responded with just kind of brings me up to another thought. I love what the Stefanie organization, the Collective PAC, is doing with their Black campaign and grooming young people to be politicians, to be inspired to be in various places within the criminal justice system and just the government all across the board. But there aren't many of you. There aren't many that look like us, you know, in the system, that work in the system. So do you have, or do you feel like there are those that are working with you that don't look like us, that have the same beliefs that you all have when it comes to how to do your job, do your work? Do you feel confident in, because as we look at history, we see that any changes or movement that is made, it's been made when not just us are pounding on the table like, what's up? And it feels to me, especially with what you guys said right now, with how few people we have of color in your picture, that
Mhm.
you need comrades that don't look like you, that are want a just system. Do you feel that that possibility is there? Do you agree with that? And anyone can take that. Just kind of raise your hand so that Charlie can make sure your mic is open. But I'm just curious your thoughts on it.
I'll start. So back when I was elected a district attorney in San Francisco, I was the first Black woman elected a DA in the state of 40 million people, and one of the very few in the country at that time. I was elected in 2003, a lifetime ago in our movement for reform of this system. And I created one of the first reentry initiatives in the country focused on first-time drug sales offenders and getting them jobs and counseling and parenting support. And then I dismissed the charges against them. People would say to me, other DAs would say to me, what is reentry? What does that mean? People would use this awful term. What are you doing pushing these hug-a-thug policies? Literally, that's what they would say. They would say to me, what are you doing? You're supposed to be locking people up, not letting them out. But some of my earliest partners back in those dark days were the foundations, were business leaders, were people, you know, of the faith-based community, but folks of every race and from every background. What I will say is that that was a long time ago, again, in this movement. One of the great advancements in what we need to do on policing, let's just talk about that specifically, has been the smartphone. Because what it has done is it has shown people what we've known for generations, but what they chose to deny or ignore, that they can no longer ignore or deny because it is in vivid detail in their face. And so we are seeing now, and this gives me hope then, Regina, to the point of your question, and I was out there marching with folks, we see these groups of, you know, multi-generational, every kind of race, gender, marching together, unified with the need for reform. But I will also say this, part of what I attribute to the advancement we've made in how the general public thinks about this, not just Black folks, not just people who have been on the receiving end of the problem. Part of what I would attribute to the progress is Black Lives Matter. And the brilliance of that movement and its leaders to put the force from the outside onto a system that is deeply rooted in status quo. Because you see, us on this panel, we chose, as Marilyn was saying, we chose to go up the rough side of the mountain. We decided to go in the system to change it. But the system is so deeply rooted in status quo. And let's be clear, when we talk about status quo, don't think that it's something that is just stagnant. It is dynamic, meaning it will fight against change. It will obstruct change. So when you have that force, the counterforce of people going inside the system to force change, and the counterforce of people outside the system, such as Black Lives Matter, putting that force on it, is when you see the yield, is when you see the change, when you see the reform. And so I do remain very hopeful, but there is still a long way to go. And we still, you know, it can be exhausting having to remind people of America's history on these issues, but I do remain hopeful.
So to somewhat echo what Senator Harris has already indicated, this iPhones and the smartphones have been the catalyst for this movement, right? Like as was already eloquently stated, you cannot any longer deny the racism and the police brutality when it comes to the quote unquote Black experience, and with Black people in police engagement in this country. And she is absolutely right. What we've seen on the federal level, and thank God for Senator Harris and Senator Booker, who have taken the mantle of leadership and run with it when it comes to police accountability, a lack of leadership federally. And so the real leaders in this movement have been those that are protesting and demanding change. And the same way that you look at like these iPhones and the smartphones and they spark this movement, this is what happened in the civil rights movement with the televisions when fire hoses and dogs were imposed upon children who were merely seeking the right to exist equally among others. And it is in this moment that we have got to transform that protest into policy, and that would not have happened without those protesters, without Black Lives Matter. This movement is so much greater, and I think it's going to make this country so much better, but we have got to capitalize off of this moment.
And I would say to your question about people, leadership that isn't Black, I think that doesn't look like us, because you're right. If we represent only 5% of elected prosecutors, what of that other 95%? And I think what we can do in these moments is lead and set the expectation that everybody should be doing this. That when Marilyn charged in the Freddie Gray case and demonstrated that you can charge in these police involved homicides, there's no excuse that if you have the facts and the evidence lined up, why you can't do it. Having seen Marilyn done that in Freddie Gray, I had 2 officer involved murders the first 2 months that I got here, and we charged them. And so what then happens is you're able to see, oh, you can do that. So when someone else doesn't do it, then you can start asking the questions. Well, what is your record on charging in police accountability cases? What is your record on transparency? You then get to set a new set of metrics for people across the board that you can then hold them accountable. Why justice on the ballot, I think, is so important is that we've been able to see where people have led on these issues, where Senator Harris has led on diversion that now opens it up for people to be treated outside of the justice system rather than in, that you can ask in your local jurisdiction, who is my district attorney? Who is my state's attorney? What is their record on police accountability? What is their record on transparency? What is their record on prosecuting offenses that could be dealt with outside of the system? And then vote those people out. And so it's only a small number of us who do this work now. I think you are now starting to see more people run for these offices, whether it's someone who has never been a prosecutor before. We've seen people who've done defense work step into the work. We've seen people who've done legal aid step into the work, where we've been able to like spread our arms and say, make room for others. It then has allowed for the work to transform. But we do need those other people to come along. I am encouraged that there's national conversation. I don't think I've heard as many people concede the fact that there's systemic racism. White people concede that there's systemic racism in the justice system than I've ever heard in the last 3 weeks. That there has been a general concession that this exists, where 6 weeks ago, 6 months ago, you would not have heard it. Well, now that you've said it, now that you've said the slogans, now that you've said the buzzwords, what is your record going to do to show it? And so for some, it's not altruistic. It's not that this is in their heart and their passion, but what the movement has done is set a baseline expectation, whether you're Black, white, Latino, or otherwise, how are you going to carry this along? And so I do feel a level of optimism because there are certain expectations now that come with being prosecutors, come with people being in the criminal justice system, that no longer will this role be so obscure where people didn't know what it was and what they did, that the war on drugs and this mass incarceration movement can go by quietly. The light that's been shown on this field by that work in the streets, by these women who are doing this work, now means that those who would otherwise hide from this can't hide any longer and will come along, if not voluntarily, but by the force of the will of the people.
I know that this job that you all do is in no ways easy. It is significant. It is important. And I can remember talking specifically with Kim Foxx not that long ago, just about the protests at her office, and knowing that she has on multiple occasions had people show up to her home that were protesting her. The fact that you all are working to do your jobs, but have to so often be aware of how the public is going to take that, how they're going to take some of the decisions you make, and how, quite frankly, scary that can be, is something that's not lost to me. There was actually a recent New York Times article came out, and it was titled "The People Who Undermine Progressive Prosecutors." And they actually quoted that if a progressive prosecutor is a Black woman, the ploys used by conservatives are shamelessly vicious. And I know all of you all have seen that in your elections, but I know that even in our own community, in your own communities, we see that there's often so much backlash, plain almost scare tactics. It's so that if I was a person coming up and wanted to be in your shoes, I would maybe say, nah, like this, this not be a role that, I can do. Kim Gardner, like, would love to know, how do you handle the emotional aspect of your job on a day-to-day basis, and continue to wake up every morning and say, yep, this is what I'm called to do, and this is what I'm going to do, no matter what's coming at me?
Well, I think I'm gonna echo the sentiments of Marilyn Mosby, who always talks about that it's not about us, it's about the work, and it's about the people we represent. But what is also what we have to also set the table in hearing my other colleagues talk about is, again, the dehumanization and sexism that comes with the extra scrutiny when you are an African-American prosecutor in this work and you're reform minded. We have this comfortability to attack us at all costs by using racist caricatures about our likeness, to dehumanize us in ways that people write letters that say they wanted to see me hung by a tree. I'm the sitting elected prosecutor in the city of St. Louis. And these are stories that many of my colleagues share, time and time again. It's this dehumanization that somehow even our male Black and white colleagues in this movement never get the same scrutiny. We have individuals who threaten us and we make complaints. And unfortunately, I'm a happily married woman in my jurisdiction. As a officer of the court, when someone makes a threat, that should be investigated seriously. But the police in my jurisdiction chose to investigate a false allegation of an affair, a fraudulent affair, lie with a police officer, before investigating a real complaint. So this dehumanization, this systemic racism, this sexism, this overt type of what it is that you say, how do we motivate us? It's about doing the work, because I want to see a fair criminal justice system for everyone, regardless of your race, your sexual orientation, your gender. And that's what I have hope in with these discussions and the unfortunate conversation we're having right now. We have been talking this every day we took office, and we have many reform-minded people who share this this vision. But what we need to not just have allies who are not Black. We also need accomplices. So when we're being criticized, we need to see our partners in this movement being criticized the same way. When we're being dehumanized, we have to have someone who's standing up, who is not us all the time. African American female prosecutors, we have to have our male colleagues say enough is enough, and this complicit silence of this dehumanization, which is we're judged to a different standard. Somehow our discretion is challenged differently. When we see across this country, even in the Michael Flynn case, people have discretion that they can use without any kind of justification, without any criticism. But then somehow when we use our discretion, we're looked upon like we're doing something unethical. So I say let's call it for what it is. It's systemic racism. It's dehumanization of African American female prosecutors. We need our colleagues to be accomplices and to say, let's stop this.
So, I mean, when you represent 1% of all elected prosecutors in the country, our very presence challenges the status quo, regardless of our actions, point blank, period. And I think what I had to learn very early on not to internalize the backlash, because you're going to get the hate mail, you're going to get the death threats. I was sued, you're going to be mocked, you're going to be ridiculed. My husband was described coming out of my house and how he would be shot and no police officers would respond. I have a book that is like 5-6 inches in length of hate mail and death threats. But one of the things that I had to learn very early on is to recognize that you can't internalize that. The keepers of the status quo do not want to give up their power and the structure that is something that was put into place to benefit them. And so when you recognize and you understand that it's greater than you, it's about what you represent to the status quo. I can't help but recognize, me and all the backlash that I received just 5 years ago. And AP just recently did a poll and said that the sentiments of Americans when it comes to policing and racial justice has now changed since I charged the officers in Freddie Gray. But following that, right, like seeing the number of Black women who have been subsequently elected as prosecutors, it was always greater than me. It was never about me. It was never about Marilyn Mosby, but what Marilyn Mosby represented to the status quo. And if you can understand and recognize that, Nikki Giovanni has a quote, "I would not reject my strength, though it's not by choice, but responsibility." And so if you're in this work for the work, and for the individuals that have put you in office, that you go to work every single day and you are held accountable to them, then it's bigger than you. And if you can understand that, then you will continue to do the work, and regardless of the misogynistic, sexist sort of vitriol that we as Black women have to deal with and encounter just because we're doing our jobs.
I have so many comments I want to make on that. In agreement with everything that you ladies said, but I'm going to ask this question because I think it's important for everyone to get to know the human side even more of all of the ladies. I know that, like myself personally, I find that there are things that I felt really strongly about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And then now, after living a little more life and just making more discoveries in life, I feel differently about them. So just curious, does that exist for you? Is there something you feel differently about now than you did before, or something you may have changed about a decision that you made before? And you don't have to share what that is, or you can, but I think it's very important for people to just see the human side of us, and know that we're looked at so much as just like we're cyborgs, like we are bitches, if you will, but we are human beings, and we think we make mistakes. So I just want to know, does that exist for you ladies, as far as feeling differently about something from your past now? Anybody want to just jump right in there? Yeah.
I'll go. Listen, I used to be a juvenile court prosecutor, and I did that work, and most of the young people that I saw come in, I was prosecuting cases, of young people who were in high school for, whether it was smoking marijuana or, getting into fights on the schoolyard. And I think about that time a lot. I'm parenting 4 teenage girls, and that is more than any notion I could have ever dreamed of. And I look at my girls, I look at their behavior, I look at that, I can tell them something and say, don't do that again. And I'll turn my back and they'll do it again. And I know, now that teenage behavior is, my mother got her wish that these girls would do to me what I did to her. And it isn't criminal. It isn't criminal. And so I look back at my time when I was a younger prosecutor handling these cases, who did not have the life experiences that I have now, the level of empathy and knowledge about adolescent brain development, the fact that teenagers are going to teenage, and how we use the criminal justice system, particularly on Black and brown kids, the criminalization of our young girls, the lack of empathy the systems have for them, that they treat them very early on as though they themselves can be victims. I look back at my tenure as a young prosecutor in our juvenile division, and certainly wish and train now for my newer prosecutors to understand what it means to be a teenager, and to understand that being a teenager who does teenage things is not criminal behavior, and the criminalization of our young people that leads them into the school to prison pipeline, the role that we, can play in that, to say we're not doing that. I've said it to our school officials, a food fight in the lunchroom is a food fight. That's not a criminal act. And when I was a kid, where I grew up, if you lost a fight, you went home, you did a couple of push-ups, you went back the next day, but you didn't call the cops. Only the people who lost called the cops, right? Like, you did not have these interventions. And so I think my evolution of not accepting that this was the only vehicle by which we could deal with kids in schools, and wishing that I can find every kid that I had prosecuted and now has a record, that I could automatically expunge that, because I know these kids grow out of it. I know that these things that they did, even some of the things that I saw that just was horrifying, these kids grow out of it. And if I could go back and say, how do we make them whole? And how do we make sure that they don't live with these scars for the rest of their lives because we intervened in a way that was not appropriate, based on what I know for sure about young people, is one of the ways that I've grown and evolved. And it shaped my policy. It shaped how I do juvenile justice work now, that is very different than the way that I grew up in the office doing it.
I'm going to you, Senator Harris.
What Kim Foxx said is great. I mean, I think that there is so much that, to your point, Regina, that as you have more life experiences, it gives you greater perspective. And I mean, the policing bill, I don't want to end my visit with everybody without talking about what Marilyn talked about, the policing bill that I have with Cory Booker, and it's the Justice and Policing Act. It's so important that we get it passed, and we were able to defeat today the Republicans' attempt to put this nothing bill on for a vote. And so the House is going to send this bill over, our collective bill over. And one of the things that it involves is independent investigations. And I believe that it is really important that we have independence, and that the community has a sense that there is credibility to investigations. I believe that we need to have pattern and practice investigations. I did those when I was Attorney General, but we need to have them at a much broader level, so that the United States Department of Justice has subpoena power to investigate police departments, as many of us have done, and I did as AG, around in law enforcement agencies, around patterns and practice of discrimination. The work we need to do on having a national standard for use of force. We can't be just asking the question, was the use of force reasonable? We need to instead ask a more fair and just question, was that use of force necessary? Banning chokeholds and carotid holds, that would have saved the life of George Floyd. To ban no-knock warrants in drug cases, that would have saved the life of Breonna Taylor. These are the things that we're fighting for. And because we know now that we need to have actually a national ban, that we need to have federal legislation. We can't just do it piecemeal, one DA at a time in terms of our local policies. We also need national standards. And so that's one of the ways that I've evolved, maybe because also I am in the United States Senate. that I am now advocating at a national level, whereas before a lot of the work that I did was hoping that it would happen at a national level, but the work was focused on a local level. But again, before I sign off, I just want to thank everybody, the people who have tuned into this, but Collective PAC and all of the work, Stefanie, that you've been doing to bring us together. Regina, thank you. And to my colleagues, my friends, this phenomenal group of women on this panel, I just want to thank you for the courage you bring to the work every day, because they make it look easy, and it is not. And they are taking hard knocks every day, but they stay committed, and we have to support them.